Here at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is somebody I've been really looking forward to speaking with. I met her at a program called Heroic Public Speaking. She is really smart. She's built herself a fantastic consulting firm. It's called P Link Leadership. She's an expert in positive psychology. And I'm sure Gretchen will tell us what that means as soon as I bring her on the show. So here she is. Hey, Gretchen, how are you today?
Hi, Josh. I'm great and happy to be here. I mean,
Hey,
anytime talking with you is a good time.
thanks so much. That's so kind of you. So, I haven't been a fan of positive psychology for a zillion years, but I'm going to bet there's some folks that don't really know what it means. So, can you give us a definition?
Yep. I'd say so. The short definition is positive psychology is the study of human flourishing. And what that just means is like, what does it take for us to thrive? And I think it's important to look at that through the lens of traditional psychology, that is 125 years worth of research of what gets in the way of us thriving. So this is the other side of the continuum, and it's really brand new, introduced in 1999.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that new. I thought it was, something that was around the 70s or 80s and finally got some traction.
I think you could say yes, that's true, but in 1999, Martin Seligman was the president of the American Psychological Association. So, right person, right time, right place, able to really introduce positive psychology as a field of study and begin to bring together disparate researchers and look at that holistically.
So, I'm assuming Seligman was looking at the entire population, and your work is really focused on businesses. Am I correct?
Yeah, specifically leaders in businesses, anybody who has responsibility for either leading themselves or leading a particular area, like an individual contributor. So we don't define a leader as a person who has direct reports. We define a leader who has responsibility for themselves or an area of the business or other people to make positive, to make progress, achieve the outcomes that matter.
So I have to ask you my famous seminar question. I've asked this question to over 1,000 people,
Okay.
and the answer I get by groups is really interesting. Is it more important to magnify your strengths or fix your weaknesses?
I can say without a doubt, it is more important to magnify your strengths. And should I give you a reason or stop there?
No, give me a reason. Good.
Okay. Because when we magnify our strengths, we make exponential gains. Like we create outcomes that then start to compound and build on themselves. And when we focus on our weaknesses, we're making incremental gains. And really, the mindset and orientation there is to get ourselves out of harm's way. And we can't really grow when we're always looking to sort of just sideways step out of harm's way. We want to be focusing on those things that make us great and then just compound them like crazy, just like the way you put money in the bank and want to compound.
So I have a question for you. I've asked this question
Mm-hmm.
to well over 1,000 people in presentations I've made over the years. And when I ask it to owners of businesses, I almost universally, in fact, all except three people have said, magnify your strengths. When I
Mm-hmm.
ask this to employees of companies, they almost universally all say, I mean it like 95%, say, fix my weaknesses. Why do you
Yeah.
think that's true?
I think because we are primed from a very early age to focus on our weaknesses, to look at the deficits. Like when I'm doing a strength map for an organization and we map the whole team, the very first thing people typically do is look for strengths that are not represented on the map. We just, everything we do tends to, I mean, it builds both on our negativity bias, which is built into our genetic code, and also all our cultural norms around identifying and pointing out weaknesses, our own as well as other people's. So this is like when we talk about positive psychology, it's a really a paradigm shift too, right? To really focus on what we want more of instead of what we want less of, to focus on compounding our strengths instead of getting so hyper focused on our weaknesses that it feels like we're never making any progress. I actually have a story about this that kind of illustrates it if we have a minute or two.
Please tell it. I like stories.
So, when a lot of times when we're beginning a coaching engagement, we start with 360 feedback. And I was debriefing 360 with one of my coaching clients. And one of the themes that came through very strongly for him was being critical, right? Pointing out what wasn't working about something. And I was able to illustrate for him how his strengths in overdrive. So, for example, a strength in, and we use the Clifton strengths, which comes out of Gallup. So, a strength in overdrive, like maximizer, or even self assurance or command, when we are sort of overusing it, which we do sometimes to compensate, it is perceived by others as a weakness. And when we get that feedback that says, hey, Josh, like this isn't working for me about you, like you should stop being this way, to stop exercising something that's a natural strength to us, it's like built into our DNA. It would be like me telling you to come to work without your arm. So then it stays as like this persistent area of development. And what this particular client said was, oh my, you just blew my mind. Like, I've always thought that I had this like permanent disease that I would never get rid of. Now I can see this through the lens of a strength and overdrive. And what we really need to just work on is how do I modulate the volume of that strength? You know, sometimes I'm going to need to turn it down, and other times I can turn it up. But instead of trying to make yourself be something that you're not.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think it's probably a an issue that happens in larger companies more than the smaller companies.
Yes, yes, I think that, you know, the larger the company, the larger your team. But to go back to your original question about like employees coming in with a focus on weakness, it's like that's all they've ever been primed to. Like in the same way that most everybody knows about PTSD, but a large percentage of the population doesn't know about post traumatic growth, even though statistically we are just as likely to experience post traumatic growth, or what's referred to as PTG, as we are PTSD.
So,
So,
can you give me an example of what post-traumatic growth might look like? Because that's an interesting concept.
yeah, right. It's really interesting. And I mean, when the great news about that is that it is continuing, the research is continuing to grow and expand. And so basically, it is the ability to experience trauma, whether that's a big T or a little t, you know, something that, and we think about trauma as something that disrupts the way that we think about the world or the way that we think the world should be operating. And and so it really, trauma really messes with people because it sort of like swipes your feet out from underneath you, you know, in terms of how you think things are going to go. So we can react to that with a stress disorder as our body and mind tries to wrap itself around that, or we can respond to that with growth, like this idea of that we come out of it stronger. And there are 5 different areas of post traumatic growth. And for example, one of those is appreciation of life, meaning being open to new possibilities and believing that things could, in fact, get better after this. An area of growth as it relates to relating to others as opposed to kind of withdrawing and going within yourself, considering new possibilities. So when we think about hope, hope is the belief that the future can be better than today and that I can have a hand in making it so. And we know that hope can get, you know, dinged when things happen that we don't expect or that we didn't plan for or that we thought would never happen to us. So that's just kind of an example of like a few of the areas that we look for when people are coming out of it, out of something like that with post-traumatic growth. So kind of in layman's terms, Josh, what that would look like is somebody would have a, a setback. Maybe it's a car accident.
Well, let me
Maybe
let
it's
me
a
give you Gretchen.
diagnosis.
Let me
Hmm.
give you an example because I've got one that happened to me.
Oh, okay, great.
So we can look at first of all, can you have PTSD and PTG at the same time?
I don't know the clinical answer to that. I don't know the clinical answer. I believe yes, because it's like a continuum, right? So you can be in a period of time where you're crossing over it, but by the time you're well onto the realm of the continuum where you're post traumatic growth, you would not be experiencing the PTSD symptoms nearly as often, if at all.
But my experience was I almost got killed when I was in Washington D.C. I got people broke into my house. They had a knife. They cut my throat. They left me there to bleed out and die. And obviously, I didn't. I won't tell you the whole story because it will take too long. But that was my trauma. I ended up leaving Washington D.C. really rapidly, going back
Hmm.
to um, my hometown of Glens Falls, New York, enrolled in college, got my degree, went to work in business, and or actually took over part of a family business and grew it, which is the growth part. But the stress PTSD part was for a period of about 15 to 20 years, I had a real problem going to cities.
Hmm.
Even though I went to Boston and go back to school at BU, it was a very safe part of Boston. There wasn't anything to worry about. Going on a subway in New York City would make me absolutely freeze, and I literally couldn't do it for 10 years. So I had PTSD going around those issues, which would put me into a similar sort of place where I was in DC. And
Hmm.
then I had all this growth that happened by going back to school, starting a business, becoming incredibly curious, doing a bunch of human potential stuff. So for me, both
Yeah.
happened at the same time.
Yeah, there was an overlap. Super interesting, Josh, and a great case study. I mean, I think what you can see there is like you came, I always sort of think about it as a person who's kind of coming out of a trauma, and you sort of came out with a determination to not just survive, but to live.
Yes.
Right, you just started sort of compounding that. However, what remained was these trigger points where, when if the situation matched close enough to the trauma, which had not at that time been resolved, then you would have a physiological response to it. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, with that example, what it could say is unaddressed trauma can certainly be encapsulated in our body and our minds, and it just sort of hangs out there until something triggers it. And so our goal, as in a situation like that, you could potentially be working with a coach like me who's on positive psychology on the growth side and how you want to keep moving in that direction, but eventually would want to work with a clinician on the therapeutic side who's familiar with PTSD to sort of help unwrap and diffuse, if you will, those triggers.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked with a therapist, but didn't work with a coach, at least for several years. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. You're a great self coach, though. You are a curious person and love to keep
Yeah, but
learning.
I've also believed that, and this is something I think is really important, is that business owners need to have coaches, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And too often, business owners believe they have to have all the answers. They can't show any vulnerability. They can't show any weakness. And if they do, people will think that they're terrible business people. At least that's been my experiences, especially in the private business world.
Yeah.
So if there's somebody like that, how would you help them understand that being an effective leader means you need to have a tribe?
I think that, well, I think there are kind of two things in there. So one is having a coach is one thing, I think, and having a tribe or a brain trust around you is another thing. And I and what I would say to a person like that, and this is changing, Josh. Like I would say I have young what I would consider millennial leaders coming into my practice who are proactively seeking out coaching as soon as they hit that level of leadership where they're pushing their own edges, which is quite different than, say, Gen X or even or boomers. But what I would say is, like, to become an exceptional leader, you need a perspective taking practice. And coaching provides not only the time and the opportunity, but also a sounding board and a thought partner to help you spend time with your own thinking, examine your own perspectives, challenge some of the beliefs that are getting in your way. And you can't do that by yourself.
No, no, I actually, you just used a term which I refer to myself as often, which is a thinking partner.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I'm not really a coach, I'm not really a mentor. My belief system is almost everything I ever mention to a business owner, they already know. They just need somebody to help them think it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
and my focus is let's think through what works and make that better. And let's find a way to manage the problems that you spend all this time focusing on because you're spending way too much time on the problem solving and not nearly enough time on the opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a strength and a weakness conversation right there, right? We
Right.
get sort of hyper focused on the problem solving and we're not capitalizing on the opportunities. Yeah. I think I would say that in my experience, they often know they already know maybe deep in their bones the thing that we're talking about, but in the coaching I'm able to draw out, their own wisdom. Like, what do you know about this? Where how else have you seen it like this? How might you creatively approach this? And sometimes we have to do a little work on sort of dissolving a limiting belief, right? Like a limiting belief, like, it's important, I can't be successful if everybody doesn't like me, or the most important thing is to maintain harmony. Like, these are, limiting beliefs that get in our way as leaders. Or that the idea that courageous authenticity is equal to conflict or confrontation, which it isn't and doesn't need to be. But there's sort of new ways to be thinking about that, and people have to sort of unlearn ways that they've maybe thought about themselves for 20 or 30 years.
The reason I'm laughing is that your examples you just used were all absolutes. And it's funny how we speak in absolutes when
Mm.
we talk about something. And I find that, when someone says, uh, all my people are X, and it's usually a pejorative of some sort.
Hmm.
So when they say that, my response is always all or
Wait, what did I say? I
always.
said all my millennials, or I said a
Yeah,
lot of my. How did I use that?
you were using examples. Your
Oh,
examples were absolutes. Is that we
mm,
always do this? So I would say always
yeah, yep.
because we don't always do anything. We might often do it. It might be 90%, but it's not always. So maybe we should examine the not always.
Hmm. Well, for the sake of our conversation today, we can assume that I meant the majority of the times or often,
No,
enough
I'm
that
not.
I see it
It's
as
not.
a theme.
I'm not saying that as a um, is a problem. I'm just saying that it's often what I see in
Hmm.
my conversations with business owners is that when they talk about the negatives in their world, it's through absolutes. When they talk through positives, it's like, well, maybe we can get there. It's not nearly as definite as the
Oh, yeah.
negatives.
I think that is very true. I get that. Right. It can be very definitive. We also seem to be much more willing to accept negative news and negative statistics than we are to trust positive. I find that people struggle sometimes to accept the value of taking a positive outcome focused approach to leadership, right? Like that's too soft, or that is, you need that command and control to be effective. Um, but I do think in general we find it a little easier to accept and be definitive or accept something as truth when it's negative and tapping into our fears.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really interesting is we do really poorly at accepting compliments.
Hmm.
So my father was terrible at that. I used to say to him, "Okay,
Mm.
Dad, we're now going to practice saying thank you. I'm going to tell you something nice, and you're going to say thank you. You're not going to give me a definition. You're not going to tell me why it's not true. You're just going to say thank you. And then if you have a real need, you can explain why that's hard for you to say. For like when people with me, they'll say, "Gee, Josh, I find you smart." And I have a really hard time just accepting that because I don't see myself as smart. I do see myself as a grind, but I don't see
Mm.
myself as smart because, that's just, we all have this stuff from when we were younger. And that is, what was true for me. And
Mm.
it took practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one of our assignments we often see in coaching. We take it up a notch, Josh. We tell them, you say thank you. I deserve that. And
Oh,
even
that's a
if
good
they
one.
can't say it out loud, they practice saying it inside their heads when somebody gives them a compliment. Thank you. I deserve that.
Yeah, I would have a hard time with the I deserve that because it sounds really, really arrogant to me.
Everybody has a hard time with it. But when you're practicing kind of leveling up in a particular area, even if you're just thinking it inside your own mind, it's about how you truly receive the compliment.
So it seems to me that a lot of people would quit at this because when you're learning a new way of thinking or a new mindset, it's often incredibly awkward to do so, and it's just easier to fall back to your old patterns. How do you deal with that?
I mean, if I was being totally honest with you, it's an ongoing challenge. So, most of our customers are businesses that have hired us to work with their employees. And so, we do talk to our business partner about how important it is to create a culture where people are encouraged to practice. We use something called a positive nudge, which is both an audio and a visual reminder that flows into the organization to anybody in the organization that wants it, that covers the key concepts so that everybody knows like what these leaders are focusing on and what they're working on to sort of help make it easier for them to practice. And then with the actual individual learners that are in our programs, like what we're able to say to them is, we can teach you every concept we've got here, every bit of evidence that we know makes a difference, but if you don't apply it, nothing will change. So at the end of each session that we do what's called a positive action commitment, or a PAC. And they write down like what is something that they are going to do to make real what they just learned in a way that other people could observe it. And they read that out loud. And if it's a virtual course, we're actually tracking it in a spreadsheet we call Make It Stick, where at the next session they all, that spreadsheet comes back up, everybody looks at what each other committed to doing, people talk through what they tried. So I mean, it really comes down to practice, Josh. I mean, I would imagine that you would know this, but it been your own experience with anything, whether that's skiing or biking or running a business or reading a P&L. It is practice and trying out new techniques and fine tuning as you go. So we try to make it clear they need to do that, and then we try to make it as easy as possible by putting lots of support in around it.
Well, hey Gretchen, unfortunately we're out of time. And
You were right.
you've got a bunch of great stuff, and I'm going to bet we have some listeners who want to find out more about you and maybe even have a conversation. If they wanted to do so, how would they do that?
The fastest way is go right to our website. So that's www.plinkleadership.com. And it's P-Link, like the letter P, Link, leadership.com. And you can click on the contact us, and that will get you right to info form that comes to me, and we'll get you scheduled. and sort of
Cool.
talk it through.
Cool. And I've got something I want you to do too. For the past 8.5 years, we've been doing this podcast, and there's one thing that can make this podcast become wider known. And that's for you to go to wherever you're listening to it and give us an honest rating and review. If you love us, you give us 5 stars. If you hate us, you give us 1 star, and I cry, and you get to laugh, and then I cry some more, and eventually I get over it. But please, 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 please go to wherever you're listening to this episode and leave us an honest rating review. And this is Josh Patrick. We're with Gretchen Paisano. You're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.